Moving on to looking at whether the coverage was fair or not. And for us, fairness in the election period is critical, and it's imperative that that all media cover the elections fairly, but more importantly so, the SABC. And the reason for this is that fairness of coverage has a huge impact on the overall nature of the elections. So we have various indicators that we look at in terms of bias reporting. And this isn't necessarily one item that is biased or one element, but it's rather a pattern over time that we analyze. And for the first time in our monitoring history of the elections, and as William mentioned earlier, we've been monitoring every election period since 1994. For the first time, we have seen systemic bias in the SABC's coverage of the elections. And again, this is a failure to meet its public service mandate. What I mean by when I say that we found bias, the results show that there's only a 10% bias in the coverage. And this doesn't sound that bad, that terrible. But if we focus in on that 10%, what we find is there's channel-specific bias, which hasn't been there before. You look at SABC2, at the Tonga and Venda News, that's sitting at 34% of its coverage was biased. Morning Live on SABC2, 22% bias. SABC3, English News, 15% bias. So just to give you an indication of what we're seeing when we talk about bias, in those top three, I'm going to focus on the top two. In the SABC Tonga Venda News, for every 3 stories put forward in their news bulletin, a third of them indicated that there was bias. Of those biased stories, 84% of bias favored the ANC. Looking at SABC Morning Live, SABC2 Morning Live, so we see a 22% biased coverage. And what we're seeing is that ANC was accessed double as much as the DA and 5 times more than the EFF. And for us, bias indicates favoring versus unfavoring, favoring of a political party, not giving a political party a chance to respond if there are allegations made or stories that appear, as well as language used within the story covered. So just to reiterate, it is the first time that we are seeing this amount of bias come in. And I think just to state that we are aware that there is going to be various elements of subjective broadcasting, and that you can't necessarily always get response from various political parties, but it is the SABC and other media have a responsibility to try and balance the coverage as much as possible. And given the results, the programs in question have served to undermine the mandate of the SABC and its credibility during the election period.
Thank you. So what those findings, we believe, clearly indicates, and I'm sorry that we've had to rush through them, we have also sent, you'll be aware, members, copies of the full report, which are publicly available. And we are very happy to discuss with anyone if they would like to have them unpacked in more detail. But what they do indicate is the impact of this crisis on the public broadcaster in an election period. There can be arguably no other greater period when fairness is required. And to its credit, the SABC in previous elections have, despite certain errors here and there, have performed admirably well. So this isn't a thing that this has always been that way. No. In fact, we've frequently pointed out that the SABC previous to these elections have covered more stories, more political parties in greater diversity, often had greater levels of gender, often covered more children's issues better than other media. And in these elections, they didn't. And we believe that this is directly linked to these issues. If we now turn to the protest ban, I think we're familiar with the basics of it, and they're written before you, so I don't want to go into too much detail. But we do know that journalists were fired for doing their job. And I believe that this is, again, linked to the thing that was raised by the chair at the start of the session. I think that in addition to the outrage that the members here have expressed to this and the recommendations, the callousness with which the SABC themselves responded to this sickens me to my stomach. It's repulsive and simply disgusting, and they cannot be allowed to get away with their response to it. Aside from everything else, they owe their journalists a significant groveling apology before the nation for the fact that they said this has nothing to do with the SABC. Moving back to the protest ban, we know that this was also supported by the minister, and I know that she'll be appearing later, and I'm hoping that you're going to put some difficult questions to her on this particular issue, because she supported it despite the fact that it being clearly and blatantly in violation of our constitution and the SABC's own code of conduct, irrespective of whether it's the ones that are illegal or not, and their editorial policies. So MMA, SOS, which is the support our colleagues, and the Freedom of Expression Institute took a case to ICASA, the CCC, and we won. And as part of that, as you're aware, because the regulator presented, I think, among the first to you, we wanted to see if they complied with the order. So we started to do some research, and we didn't believe that they were complying, given that there was no official statement issued to their journalists and no instruction to them that they should reverse it. And clearly this is important because it had a chilling effect in the news. And we know for a fact, and this is also covered in our elections report, that the protest ban was in full force during the run-up to our local government elections. And the critical point here is simply this. If you can't believe what they're showing you in and around public violence of elections, how on earth do you expect ordinary citizens to believe just about anything else that you put on the channels? This is a massive implication for our democratic space. So the various data is there specifying what periods we monitored. We monitored 3 separate weeks. Over 95 bulletins and 950 news items were monitored. Now, if you get to that page, it's called Key Findings of Violent Footage, and you'll see 2 pie charts that look almost like the inverse of each other. And what they show is this, is that we asked where protest items were covered. Did the footage show people involved in active destruction? Because that's what they said they didn't want people to see for a variety of reasons. Some of them moronic and others slightly less moronic and others frankly just laughable. But what you'll see there is that in the overwhelming majority they failed to show the actual violence. What they did show in the pie chart on the right of that slide is that they showed the aftermath, which is what they said they were going to do. Bear in mind, these are 3-week periods after the protest ban and after the SABC said they were complying with it. In other words, we believe that they have actively deceived or lied to us, and it's in the public interest that we understand that they've lied to us about these particular issues. So if we look at the protest ban, we see that violent protests were covered, but far less than non-violent protests, both in terms of prominence in the bulletins and in terms of the number of stories. So the violent protests were often put further back in the news bulletins, despite all of the things going on. And the footage of the aftermath was shown. So we believe that this is pretty conclusive evidence and supports the regulators' finding that the SABC is in complete violation of their order. Moving now to our other item in relation to the dodgy deal between the SABC and MultiChoice. Media Monitoring Africa and the SOS are currently involved in a competition case. There was a matter heard, I think, just over a week and a half ago. Forgive my dates on that, but so we do have a vested interest in this case, and our reason for entering it is that we were opposed to it as it changed a fundamental policy issue of the SABC. And it also effectively sold off the SABC's programming archives, and it did this all too cheaply. You'll know, I'm sure, from your other experience in relation to broadcasting matters that while 553 million rand over 5 years sounds like a lot of money, in broadcast terms, this is not a lot of money. And yet look at what they got for it. So MultiChoice did very well. The SABC clearly did not do very well. Well, some within the SABC allegedly did. We know that Mr. Motsoeneng apparently got some nice bonuses, which is a bit like rewarding a paedophile by giving him access to more children. So we know that the SABC has also not been willing to hand over relevant documents, although I understand recently that they have handed over documents. And yet at the same, so there's something funny going on here, right? There's an unwillingness to talk about these things, and we know from our own court experience that they were unwilling to hand over documents, or they said they lost them, or they couldn't find them. And yet, MultiChoice says, no, this is fine, this is a normal deal. I don't know what you're going on about. This is a perfectly ordinary licensing agreement, right? Those things have been stated in court papers and in public forum. So the question that we have to ask around that, and that we would like you to engage with, is if it was an ordinary deal, why were there concerns about the regulator and whether or not they thought that this would pass muster, right? I don't imagine that if it's an ordinary deal that you would automatically put in a clause that says, we might need to check if this goes with the regulator. And the second question then is, why would you include a clause stating that the SABC CEO and the MultiChoice CEO will meet annually to discuss matters? Is that part of every agreement that you put that in for them to sit down at a table and say, okay, let's discuss matters? Is that part of ordinary licensing agreements? I'm not sure. The point is, though, and we would support this honourable committee calling before some of the people from MultiChoice, because we are certain that they would be far more willing to give valid answers than perhaps some of those that have presented from the SABC. So moving to our conclusions and some of our requests, we see that the research has demonstrated we believe that the SABC has failed to meet its public service mandate, especially during one of the most crucial periods in the run-up to local government elections. We've found for the first time systemic bias on programs, which we believe constitutes a clear threat to our democracy. We've seen a failure and/or refusal to obey ICASA's orders to reverse the public protest ban, which shows the SABC board and senior management do not believe they're accountable to the public. And we see that they've vested interests including big bonuses, allegedly at least, in regard to the SABC MultiChoice deal. So what this evidence shows, and the reason our presentation was called Why These Crises Really Matter, is that all of the other things you've heard have been in and around the SABC. These are the things that impact the content that every South African has to be exposed to. These are the things, this is where the rubber hits the road, as they say, where this crisis impacts South Africans. We've heard about their loss in audiences and their loss in advertising revenue. These crises are very real. And in fact, you see a management team that is not only in crisis, but one that has gone rogue. You know, there's lots of talk about rogue units. You want to find it? It's there. It's sitting at Auckland Park. Well, it was partly anyway. We believe that those responsible must be fired and held accountable. We believe that there should be a full investigation into this deal with the SABC and MultiChoice. And we believe that Parliament needs to act too. Beyond this hearing, clearly we need to change the law. We drafted, and by we I'm suggesting Media Monitoring Africa and the SOS Public Support Broadcast, Public Broadcasting was there. We drafted these things for Parliament in 2008. If only we'd had a little bit more foresight then. If we don't do these things, we're merely going to start a new crisis. So it might be well and fine to recommend that these people are removed and fired. Good. But we need to change these things in the law. We also would argue very strongly that the SABC's independence needs to be far more strongly secured and protected, and in fact we believe that in this regard one of the critical recommendations must be that the SABC become a Chapter 9 institution. So in wrapping up, you'll see I've got a quote. It comes from a rather famous case. It's by our Chief Justice Mogoeng, commonly known as the Nkandla judgment. And in the introduction, he says, "For this reason, public office bearers ignore constitutional obligations at their peril. This is so because constitutionalism, accountability, and the rule of law constitute the sharp and mighty sword that stands ready to chop the ugly head of impunity off its stiffened neck. It is against this backdrop that the following remarks must be understood. If these values are not observed and their precepts not carried out conscientiously, we have a recipe for a constitutional crisis of great magnitude. In a state predicated on a desire to maintain the rule of law, it is imperative that one and all should be driven by a moral obligation to ensure the continued survival of our democracy. This quote is so incredibly apt for this particular crisis that you're seeking to investigate, and we call on you to chop the ugly head of impunity off its stiffened neck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Bird, just one or two questions. The first is, you previously did similar work for the SABC for which they paid you. And I'm raising this because I don't want people to come and say, you did this on your own because you didn't get the business from them. You went to write a bad report about them. If you can just comment on that. Secondly, did you conduct a similar exercise in respect of other media houses, particularly in the space within which the SABC operates? And if so, can you provide us with a similar report?
Thank you, sir. Yes, previously we've been paid to, as part of an open tender process, we did commissioned work for the SABC on how the SABCs performed during an election period. I'm not aware that they put out a tender or anything for that for the 2016 local government elections. If they had, we would have applied, as anyone else may have. We were supported in this work by two other donors. It was not a case of looking for these things. In fact, when you do this work, you hope that you don't. Our default bias in our media is that we assume the media are fair, and we look for overwhelming evidence to produce or to point us in a direction that suggests otherwise. On the second issue, yes, we monitored, as my colleague Thandi pointed out, we monitored 73 media in these local government elections, so that includes some of the SABC's competitors. We have got an online version of that report on our website, and we'd be happy again to make available specific comparisons for the committee if they should so request.
Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Nkwankwa, your 5 minutes starts now.
Chairperson, I'm not going to ask any questions due to the political nature of this matter. I want to agree with you in saying that in many instances the coverage has been, especially around elections, has been skewed in favor of the largest parties without overly politicizing it. I could if I want to. I'll give you an example. For instance, in the Eastern Cape, we got 6.6% of the votes in the 2014 national and provincial elections. That is just over 134,000 votes. But if you looked at our coverage, it was non-existent. It was nowhere to be found, nowhere to be seen. And we still battle with that problem. So I'm agreeing with you to say it's a matter that we need to address. The other one, for instance, look at political parties such as the IFP, sister opposition parties, and NFP, which were the third and fourth largest parties respectively in that province. You could see that in terms of the coverage, they were accorded that status every time the campaigning was covered in the KwaZulu-Natal and so on. So it's a major challenge that we need to actually look into. But I think where coverage is to a large extent very fair would be on SABC radio. I think an area where there's too much contestation for space would be TV. And to a large extent, one can say, I put it to you, that we received, even as opposition parties, and the women's voices that we are talking about, were covered actually very fairly on radio than they were on TV. What is your take on that one as the first question?
So the principle of equitable coverage is one that we've engaged on with various media houses and the bodies like the IEC and the regulator. And the SABC, in fairness to them, have got an incredibly hard job to do around how on earth you kind of spread the multiplicity of parties that are there. And by and large, as I've said, previous to these elections, they've done, I wouldn't necessarily want to say a brilliant job, but certainly a much better job than many others. If you look at that kind of, if you look at the broad shape of the election graph, you'll see that the ANC doesn't generally get the level of coverage that it has in Parliament, right? But the broad shape of it is that it'll go the ANC, the DA, and then it used to be it was COPE in the 2009 elections, and now it's the EFF, of course. But that kind of broad shape tends to be followed across the majority of media in South Africa. It changes from radio to radio, so you do find that regional thing. So you do find higher covered levels of coverage. Depending on where the radio stations are based for some of those different political parties. So you would expect greater coverage of the DA, for example, in the Western Cape, because, of course, given the level of power that they have here, and that is reflected, broadly speaking. So in and of itself, that isn't, we don't believe, a problem, right? It's when it becomes significantly imbalanced, and it's when you look at the nature of that coverage, where it's overtly and clearly biased either in favor or clearly disfavors a political party. The gender issue, I must just tell you, doesn't hold. Gender is an issue that the SABC has not taken with any degree of seriousness for a longer time.
Any concrete proposals about how to change that? I'm asking you that question primarily because you said the local government elections were covered the same way that one would cover national elections, even though the dynamics are completely different. How would we address that problem? That's why I've decided to cite, the provincial elections as probably a guide, is to look at the strength of a political party regionally before you consider which political party to give airtime. Obviously, the party that rules and the number of votes at national level would be considered. That's why I'm asking you, are there any concrete proposals about how to change it and make it more equitable?
So if you look within the SABC, previous to this, again, they had a fairly complex formula around how you determine equitable coverage. It's not an arbitrary thing. And if you look at our data, you'll find that for elections debates, you can see that formula in play, right, where they do give a lot of other parties a lot more airtime than otherwise. So it's not like there's something necessarily new that we need to do here. We need to take the stuff that has been developed over our wonderful democratic history and simply apply it again in a way that is open and transparent. We have said in our report, I think somewhere, that we talk about the need to debate and discuss what constitutes equitable coverage, because it is a challenge for small parties as to how on earth they can possibly compete with some of the bigger ones. But again, that's not unique to South Africa or indeed to the SABC.
That's all.
Thank you very much, Honourable Mokoena.
Thank you, Chair. We made an interesting finding in regional broadcast. We found that we as a EFF, where we were slightly better covered, we did better in terms of the elections. It's not to say that, if you're better covered, it necessarily results in... but I'm interested in your inputs to the NCOP on the Broadcast Amendment Bill. What of your inputs were the major ones that you thought could be impediments to the growth of the SABC?
So two brief responses to that. Our colleagues who will be presenting subsequent to this, SOS have got very clear concrete proposals on how we can fix the Broadcast Amendment Act. I don't want to preempt anything that they say, but we are also very happy to share with the committee because we had the draft amendments. We'll share those. They're related to appointment of the board, the nature of the interim board, the transparency, and in fact relating to things around who should have the power to hire and remove executive members.
Thank you. And that'll obviously affect the memorandum of incorporation and any other documents that fall under the SABC.
Yes, again, our colleagues are going to speak to the MOI specifically, which is clearly and patently in the way it's currently done a complete and utter disaster.
Okay. The other thing that I'm interested in is that the bias in reporting. Like we said when the SABC 8 was here, it's not a new thing. But what the interesting development in this version of bias reporting is that it's now targeted an individual within an organization. So we're slowly gravitating towards a dictatorship instead of a bias to a political party. What's your comment on that? We've seen, for instance, how Mr. Hlaudi would instruct that a certain individual must be depicted in a certain way, and that negative reporting against that individual must not be broadcast.
I think clearly it's simply and patently outrageous, and it's completely and fundamentally unacceptable. I don't think if any of us in this room were asked to name the COO or CEO or acting banana bread, whatever other position they choose to invent, we would be able to nominate or name such a person from any other major media house in this country. The fact that that person has taken center stage and has dictated the level of coverage. In fact, we were going to start this presentation with a 7-minute interlude while we had praise singers come in and sing for us, but we didn't have the money and the time, or sadly not the power.
Last question, the protest ban. The other unintended effect that it's had is that it has assisted in the failure of the broadcaster to give evidence to who is instigating violence, because it's not in the public domain. We're not able to see who did what. What is your comment to that?
So in our protest ban report, you'll see that at the end we give a more recent case study. It was from October, where there was some violence in Johannesburg. There was a jazz club. There were some of our most incredible local singers were singing that evening, and some protesters burnt down an SABC OB van. The SABC was there, their reporters were there, and yet they chose not to show us that, even though. So it gives the public a very clear and overtly distorted version of reality, as if somehow violence occurs by marauding people. And the other challenge with this is it feeds directly into racist stereotypes that these people have no thoughts, they have no context, they have no reason, they have no rationality. They're just beings that go and run and attack things with no kind of rhyme or reason. And of course, the research on much of the community-based violence shows that that is simply not the case.
Honorable
Thank you very
Mathana.
much.
Chair, thank you. No. I think we should raise the issue that South Africa is a constitutional country. The constitution of the country is the supreme law, and all of us and all institutions are subject to it. So it is it's unfortunate that Mr. Bennett chose to say, compare South Africa of today with the racist, autocratic, apartheid South Africa. So I think it's unfortunate. But the second problem I have is that he says he comes here, he's angry. I have a problem with a person who starts a meeting by telling us that he's angry. Because, well, for me, it's a decision that you have made to be angry. I think you should keep it to yourself. You must not come and behave like Claudi. But the issue that is crucial, Chair, is I think very important issues have been raised. And I think colleagues here have already corroborated some of them. But the issue that I find interesting here is, this is research work. In research, if you leave other variables, you have a story that you want to tell. Now, let me just pull one aspect, your demographics. You've chosen political parties, you've chosen gender. Why did you leave race out? Because it would be interesting to hear as to how the race coverage occurred during the elections, because it's a very important variable. As I'm saying, when you do your analysis, there are these variables that are crucial, and you left the race. And why did you leave the race variable? And what is the outcome of that race variable in the statistics?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Sure, that's a bit of a put down comparing me to Mr. Motsoneng. No. And let me be clear about something. I did not mean to suggest for a moment that South Africa today, even with the SABC as it is today, is anywhere anything like as we were under apartheid, right? Those are completely fundamentally different things. And if that was the message that came across, I humbly apologize and withdraw that unreservedly. What I intend to put across with that was that these actions are things that seek to take us back to that kind of place where there were no rights, where there was no accountability, there was no transparency, there was no logic to things, there was greed and corruption of a level that we had moved away from significantly. So that's what I meant by that point. On the point of anger, yes, I guess anger is a choice. I'm not sure about emotions, but I think that people should be angry about where we are with the SABC precisely because we're better than that as a nation. You know, we can do and we do the most incredible and amazing things as people in South Africa. So for us to be having to deal with this level of debate about saying, oh, let's have a protest ban as though this is some kind of a clever idea. No, we should be saying, how on earth can we be moving forward in a digital environment? How do we make digital issues address fundamental issues of inequality? How do we make sure all people get a voice in our broadcasting media? Those are the things that I would like us to be discussing. But okay, around the race. So that's why I'm angry, and I maintain that. So, around the race issue, race is a critical indicator for us. This is a matter of time, and I don't believe that the coverage around the election specifically impacted the manner in which the SABC represented race specifically. We're very happy to engage with you extensively on this. We're one of the few organizations who seek to continue to expose issues around race representation in media, because we agree it's of fundamental importance.
No. Chair, well, I think whilst appreciating this analysis, but there must be an appreciation of the capital that each organization or individuals holds in society. For instance, Nkwanko was saying that in the Eastern Cape, in the radio, they actually got sufficient coverage. And I can't find it in the report in a way. Julius gets super coverage.
Honorable Malema.
Thank you, Chair.
Julius.
Yes,
Honorable Malema.
Mr. Julius Malema receives quite substantive coverage. And but indeed, I think the issues that you have raised here are very interesting. And I guess it's something that we will have to look at. But as I conclude, Chair, there must be an appreciation that whilst this is a committee of parliament, this is an ad hoc committee on the SABC and not the committee to which you were referring to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Masango. Honorable Swart.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you for the very incisive input. As a representative of the ACDP, obviously we welcome some of the inputs that you have made, but I'd like to rather discuss the broader issues that we are all without party differences, and that is the matter of the multi-choice deal. We've got a document here in the Competition Appeal Court where you are, as Media Monitoring Project, an appellant, and it's the information there is staggering, I think. And we appreciate that a lot of the commercial information has been deleted, but just very quickly, where is that matter now as far as its hearing? There's obviously been a tribunal hearing, and this is a further hearing that's taken place on appeal. And quite significantly, there's a quote from Professor Maguve, who appeared before us yesterday and seemed very vague about the multi-choice deal, where he says that at the launch of the Encore channel, which was a culmination of the deal, multi-choice, thank you for this wonderful partnership. Actually, for me, I would have preferred it not just to be a partnership, it should be a marriage, etc., etc. We love you so much, multi-choice. Now, maybe it was unfair, I didn't have this document, I would have liked to have put it to him yesterday. But it seems that he has a lot more knowledge of this deal than he would have indicated yesterday as chairman of the board. So obviously that's a great concern. If you can touch on it very briefly. And then secondly, your investigation of other deals, such as the information that we had from Vuyo Mvuko of the relationship between the SABC and TNA and the ANN7 breakfasts with New Age. Are you aware of that? Have you done any investigation? And maybe the SOS Support Public Broadcasting can also comment on this, because we understand that the SABC is in fact, well, according to the evidence, Morning Live resources are being diverted, I'm told, to pay for the production costs of TNA breakfast, a total rival. Have you done any investigation into that as well? Thank you.
Thank you. The short answer to that is no. We haven't investigated I mean, we're not an investigative organization. What we do is where the opportunity arises and where we've got something to contribute, we will participate in strategic litigation, as we believe that the current matter is. I do know that some of the matters around the TNA breakfasts and the role of the SABC have already been exposed in media independently, and I would hope that some of the bodies responsible would investigate those things. I mean, traditionally, of course, the board is meant to report to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on these things, and I think that they should have been asking them some of these difficult questions, because this isn't the first time we've heard that particular set of allegations. On where the multi-choice case is now, I think it was 10 days ago in court before the Western Cape High Court, because we submitted a complaint that the SABC had not been forthcoming in particular the SABC, let me just stress, had not been forthcoming in relation to the documents that had been the order of the Competition Tribunal. And so then it's turned on, and forgive me for paraphrasing here, but it turned on the issue as to the investigative powers of the commission, and whether and to what degree they have those or don't have those. And we're currently awaiting judgment on that particular matter.
Thank you. And then lastly, just on the ICASA complaint about the banning of the protests and the non-compliance, according to your research, of the order that was given by ICASA. Are you aware that criminal action has now been laid, and are you aware of any further process in lines of that criminal action? The board chairman seemed to be unaware of that yesterday as well.
Yes, we were aware of it. We heard the regulator announce it, I believe, during their input to this particular ad hoc committee. And so we know about that. I'm not sure if they've laid a charge. I know that they laid a charge on the basis of non-compliance with the board resolution. I don't know if they laid a charge on the issue of compliance with the other element of their particular order, but we've agreed to work closely with the regulator to see if we can assist in that regard.
Honourable Khoza.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Media Monitoring Africa. Just one thing that I think we need to pass through. When you were putting together when you were monitoring your media and putting the data together, were you objective? And did you take the factual aspects into account? What do I mean by that? The reality is that in South Africa, the African National Congress is the ruling party, and therefore, your member of the executive will inadvertently be ANC. And inadvertently, those people will tend to enjoy more media coverage. And that's how the nature of news is. I just want to check with you on that aspect, whether you did take those aspects into account. Because there is some very useful information in what you are giving us here.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The short answer is, are we objective? No. Are we fair in the manner in which we approach it, and are we clear about the assumptions on which we approach it? Yes, we are. So those things are outlined quite in some detail in the introduction to our full report on that. We work from a human rights-based framework. Our constitution, which I carry with me, is the basis of that document. So our assumption is that media seek to be fair, that they don't go out to be biased in any way, shape or form. So the findings, as I've said, around you would expect the ANC to dominate media coverage. It has done for almost every single election period.
But then say in your own findings, you are saying the ANC, and this is the key finding that you've put in here. The ANC was assessed double the DA, and it's like now there was something wrong with that outcome.
Okay, so perhaps that's a matter of context for that particular slide. So if you look at the levels of party coverage, that's one thing. If you look at how often people speak within news items, that's quite a different thing. So if you're looking at issues of, and that is referring specifically to biased items. So in those items where it clearly favored or clearly disfavored either the ANC, the EFF, DA, or etc.
All right, so now I understand, but there is something that I need to comment on. I honestly think that your choice of words are just way too ideologically emotive. The fact that you are also going to an extent of talking about Verwoerd's ghost, to me, you become very, very subjective. And you must remember, when Tlhaudi Motsoneng started doing these things, the ANC came out in the open and they challenged Motsoneng. In fact, some of the witnesses that came here during this interview did say, in fact, Motsoneng is on record having said, you know, he doesn't care about the ANC. Now, when you are putting these kind of statements across, you are actually suggesting that Motsoneng has an ideological backing behind him, when in fact he may have, yes, probably may have a particular minister supporting him, but not necessarily the party as an institution. And I do think that you overstretch there, and I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
You've got 1 minute if you want to respond.
I think that, thank you for that. I mean, the point is well made and taken. I don't think that we suggest in these reports that Mr. Motsoneng is driving an ANC agenda. I don't, not at all. What the reference to Verwoerd's ghost is that the kind of approach where you have a person sitting at the top instructing minions at every level below to do and implement things is akin to the way in which the Nationalist Party government sought to run and administer the SABC. There was a lot of work done to ensure that there were various checks and balances created within the SABC to ensure that that kind of thing couldn't happen. So is it an unpleasant stretch to take to suggest that those are the same tactics that the Nationalist Party government did? Maybe it is an unpleasant stretch, but it's certainly an accurate one.
No. Honorable Khoza, please. Honorable Khoza. And Honorable Mahlangu. No, Honorable Khoza, we're not going to allow this. No, I'm not.
Point of order, Chair.
No,
I'm raising the issue of the sound outside, whether it is not affecting the recording. I think it's quite heavy.
Honorable Khoza. Honorable Oliwe.
Thanks, Chair. With your disclaimer of anger, how objective is the contents of this presentation?
As I said, we are very clear about the assumptions that we use in doing the research. The anger isn't about the research. The anger is the situation that we find ourselves in. We've been monitoring the elections since we've started, and there's no anger about that. We see it as an essential part of our democratic process. The anger, Honourable Member, is directed at the fact that we are here and we're seeing one of our critical public institutions being undermined, being treated as though it's some kind of thing that can be toyed with for personal gain. And so I don't believe that that anger impacts, certainly not the findings in any way, shape or form, and I'd welcome any kind of comment that would demonstrate that.
In your presentation, you indicated that in 2008, you made a presentation to the NCOP. You indicated that you've also presented to the committee, and it was as if you have lost hope. Do you trust this process of ours?
Sure, that's a difficult one. I think that what we've seen in recent times, the establishment of this inquiry and the previous meeting of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee gives us hope once again that action can and will be taken. I think that we've seen a very strong and direct response, not only from this particular inquiry, but also from other critical bodies like the independent regulator. So it's never too late, you know. I think that we've got an incredible democracy if we just adhere to some of the processes we set out.
You respond like a politician. Do you trust this process, yes or no?
This particular inquiry, I have no reason to doubt it. Our dealings with the people involved here, the level of questions, the interrogation from the honourable members would give me far greater cause for hope and optimism. So yes, we do trust this.
In your slide, which talks to key findings, especially the area of political party coverage, you are saying in bullet 3 some positive exceptions in elections dedicated programming where greater diversity covered. But you chose, when you were presenting, to only articulate the negative ones. Can you share with the country even the positive aspects?
Thank you. To reiterate the positive findings of the political party coverage, with the election debates, the dedicated channels, what we did see was an opportunity for various political parties to voice their opinions, to, you know, speak about their manifestos, to have those debates. And that's the kind of coverage that we would have liked to see further. So yes, we did focus on the other aspects of political party coverage, but it was important to do so. And you know, I think it's also important that we did highlight the positive, and that did reflect in the election coverage, the election debate programming.
Thanks. On the slide which talks to protest ban conclusion, your first bullet is saying protests were covered on SABC TV. Your last bullet is saying SABC did not adhere to the order and deceived SABC staff, the regulator, Parliament, and the people of South Africa. Can you bridge the gap between those two bullets?
Thank you. That's a lovely question. So if the point of the protest ban was the SABC said, they didn't say we're not ever going to cover protests. They argued that they weren't going to cover violent protests and people guilty of destroying public property. The fact that we know that they were instructed not to cover the right to know peaceful protest supports our argument further. But that conclusion then it says, and if you look at the full report on that, you'll find that they did cover protests because it's part and parcel of any news organization's news agenda, but many of them were in fact seen to be peaceful protests. So a lot of the protests that were covered in those periods were often labor things, labor disputes. They weren't, however, the ones that were often the ones that were violent. So when we say in our conclusion they covered protests, we're referring to that broader category, but did they show the actual violent footage, which the protest ban said they would not show? No, they didn't clearly, and then that then leads us to that particular conclusion.
Honourable Fender.
Thanks, Chair. I think anyone who's watched proceedings over the last week about what has happened at the SABC should be angry. If you're not angry, then I think there'd be something wrong with you. I do not think it is the duty of this committee to regulate the emotions and feelings of people that come to this committee to provide us with information so we can make our decisions. I found that very wrong. I think it's an objective fact, actually, that the SABC gave the ANC unfair coverage. I mean, we monitor our coverage too, and it is quite clear that the SABC gives the ANC way more coverage than it should be getting. In fact, one of the reporters who was here this week, Tandega Gulube, specifically said that they were forced to make sure that they give the ANC more coverage than they deserved. In her written account, she said that the reports would be like a coverage basically of government activities. There'd be a report about the premier opening an envelope there, followed by a minister doing this, followed by a premier doing that. So it's an objective fact, and let's not pretend that isn't happening. But to my question now,
I'm really not going to allow us for this thing to degenerate. I am not going to allow it. Continue, ma'am.
My question. When the protest ban was announced, the SABC kind of said, it's because people see what happens on TV, then they go out there and they do the same thing. Is there any scientific research to back that claim?
Thank you, Honourable Member. So the short answer is no. And the slightly longer answer is that if you look at the many reasons that the SABC put forward, it supports the fact that they didn't have any logical, or maybe not logical, but they didn't have any theorized reason as to why they took that decision. The fact that a significant policy was changed as a result of a press release, where there was no substantiation given for that, where when they presented during the ICASA CCC hearing, they'd put forward at least 4 or 5 different explanations. So one day it was about the fact that we didn't want young people to see it and then become violent criminals. Another day it was about saying, no, it destroys the public and it gives a bad image to our country. So they kept on putting different answers for that thing, which shows that there was no coherent policy behind it. If there had been, it would be something that you could at least engage with and debate. But the reality is you had a press release, and then any number of ramblings about why they chose to do this.
Thank you so much. Honourable Chauke.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question will be, how long you have been interacting with Parliament in the position that you are holding from the position of media monitoring? Just your experience, how long it has been so far?
Personally, I think I appeared first before, one of the ones I can remember was, there was an inquiry into transformational lack thereof into advertising in the media, and that was in 2000 maybe.
Was that the last time?
No, that was not the last time, sorry. I thought you meant how long have I been doing this. I've been doing it since about 2000, on and off, depending on as and when resources allow us to come and present and when opportunities arise. I can't remember the last time offhand. I'm happy to look it up and send you the details.
Okay. So you have not lost hope on the parliamentary processes?
No, indeed. My colleagues just pointing out it was the Film and Publications Board. No, we love our democracy. We love the SABC. We have full hope and belief in the fact that as people we can overcome those that seek to undermine and destroy our democracy. Of that there's no doubt.
Okay. Now on that note, therefore, Chair, I'm going to encourage you to continue engaging with the Portfolio Committee of Communication, because most of the issues that we have really dealt with here today, especially on the coverage of elections and all of that, they may be best suited at the level of the Portfolio Committee, because this committee may not exist after February. So I would definitely want to encourage you there. And I think it's good that where we are seated today, if you look at the Broadcasting Act that we have, I think it's one of the most solid act of parliament that we have, because we are media monitoring Africa. So I'll take it that you don't only work in South Africa, you do work in the continent too. And if you had to compare that, you'll find that, in fact, South Africa is having the best legislation in place. Do you agree with me on that part?
Do we have significantly higher levels of media freedom? Broadly speaking, yes. Is the SABC, despite its challenges, a significantly stronger institutionally organization than many of our Southern African counterparts? Again, pretty much undoubtedly yes. Is the legislation all good? I mean, the Broadcast Amendment Bill, I know because we were involved in a lot of the debates about that. We believe one of the reasons we're here is because we gave far too much power to the minister, which has resulted in 12 CEOs in 8 years, because they answer to 2 centers of power. So I think it's a nuanced answer, but broadly speaking, I think we've got a lot to be proud of in relation to our media and policy environment in South Africa.
So my last question, obvious, is that you're happy to have met the ad hoc committee today and looking forward to engage in future again on parliamentary processes, okay?
Yes, and please let me be clear, the anger that we express is not directed at the honourable members. It is in fact directed at those responsible for bringing us to this point. But we're very delighted to be sharing these insights with you.
So I'll definitely encourage you to not to lose hope, but to continue putting your point across so that the Parliament one day will listen to your point of view, because there are many point of views that are in place. Thank you very much.
Honourable Killeen, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson, and I apologize that I was a little late. Can I just ask you, if I look at your last recommendations and the conclusion and the requests, I just want to start with the multi-choice deal. You are suggesting that that we should obtain information from nowhere else from multi-choice. Can you please tell us what benefit would the SABC derive from the multi-choice deal? Are you aware? What are they paying for the channel? You know, it's hardly difficult to believe that it's going free on air. What is the package multi-choice deal include? Do you have any information that could be beneficial to us?
Yes, I believe so there's the original agreement, which I believe you all have a copy of. If you don't, we'll happily furnish you with one. And then there was an amended agreement between multi-choice and the SABC. That was, broadly speaking, or certain components of it were kept under wraps. We don't know what they were. They were revealed to the competition tribunal. But I think that deal has now been made public as well on City Press's website. I'm just looking to my colleague to confirm that. I believe it is there and free for public download, and that details the payments. The things that aren't there, of course, are the allegations around the bonuses paid to other individuals.
So what you're telling us is that we can have access to the multi-choice deal, the contract that was signed, and that we could see who signed it, etc. It's for public consumption, because we were informed by the SABC that is sensitive and commercially sensitive information.
Yes, but I suspect, Honourable Member, the SABC has suggested any manner of things that are perhaps less than entirely true. It is there. It's available for, as I've said, we can furnish you with a copy of these are matters of public record. They were part of the affidavits that were submitted in the competition tribunal. The original agreement was made public, which is why we decided to kick up a big fuss about this. And the amended agreement, as I've said, I understand, has now been made available on the City Press's website as a result of their expose on Sunday. But you'll see in that agreement that it was signed by Mr. Motsoneng.
Right. I would now like to move to the findings of the 2016 election. Just first of all, you know, what they're saying about media is for a politician to complain about the media is like a captain complaining about the storms on the sea. Sometimes they complain about the content or lack of visuals, but politicians will always complain. It also depends on the news value of some of the issues. Now, I'm just asking you, you are saying our elections is not issue-based. Well, the coverage was not issue-based, but it was rather campaign-based. Is there not something wrong with the way that we conduct elections in South Africa, that we personalize matters and actually give voters very little choice to understand what the real issues are?
Yes, we would agree with that analysis entirely. It's one of the points we've been raising for at least a decade about the manner in which all of our media, and by that I mean the community, the commercial, the privates, the public, all of them tend to cover them in the same way, which is that very often media houses allow their agenda, their elections agenda, to be determined by whatever the political parties are doing. Honourable Malema is probably one of the most astute people in the world at doing this. You know, he can create an event out of nothing and suddenly get massive media coverage for these things, which isn't to say that that isn't necessarily newsworthy, but the point, I guess, is that what our research shows again and again and again is that the issues that people are interested in learning about, how we're going to address poverty, how you're going to address high levels of crime, gender-based violence, child abuse, inequality, these critical, the land issue doesn't feature as a thing. Racism doesn't feature as an issue, and yet these are the things that drive our everyday debates and discussions, yet they don't feature as issues in elections coverage. And we do need to make a shift. And again, this is one of the reasons for anger, is those are the kind of really interesting questions that Parliament should be engaging with media on, is how do we improve these things? How do political parties shift that? Because interestingly, in our report, you'll also see that we have an analysis that compares political party adverts against the coverage. So you'll see that political parties are far more astute at this than perhaps we may give them credit for sometimes as media, right? Which is that they talk about issues. So the political party adverts we analysed talked about specific issues, whereas the media coverage didn't tend to match that. And again, that's not, I mean, it's an indictment of our public broadcaster, yes, but it's equally so of our other media.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ms. Smith and Mr. Bird and everybody else, when you get invited to the old assembly or to Parliament, you're entering a political terrain. With a diversity of views and all sorts of things, so you must expect robustness, and I'm not saying you didn't expect it. But equally, even from our side, I think it's all right to disagree, but we shouldn't be disagreeable. We can disagree and argue, it's how we do it that becomes important. So, yeah, we might have been harsh on you, but so have we been on everybody else. And as I said earlier on, it's never personal. It's all in the interest of bettering our oversight ability as Parliament, certainly. So please don't accept that as a personal attack on media monitoring Africa. Once again, if, as we say to everybody else, there's anything that you think of doing between, or think of presenting to us between now and the 28th, that will assist in strengthening our report, that will assist in us being able to deflect any criticism from our final product. Please provide that to us via the office, and we will certainly, in our own engagements as a committee, consider everything, including what has come out today. Having said that, once again, thank you very much for availing yourself, and as is practice from this committee, on behalf of the committee, we wish you a Merry Christmas, and we wish you